I saw the tornado coming, and I'm thinking, okay, a lot of wind. This old house is 175 years old. It's had worse winds than this. It'll stand. About that time, I saw a piece of my roofing fly past my window. Oh, okay, maybe we're going to have some damage. And then I felt the floor move. And now this is something I don't think is good. It wasn't a pleasant day.
Welcome to Fairdale. Just 5 years ago, this community bore the brunt of a deadly EF4 tornado. It's left an indelible mark on those that lived through the terror. Tonight, we'll meet some of them, from a couple that lost their home to storm chasers and researchers to first responders that were called into action. All share their memories. We start with the storm itself and the conditions that allowed the tornado to form. The evening of April 9th, 2015 is an evening that many across northern Illinois will not soon forget.
Oh my goodness.
If you are in Rochelle, you need to take shelter now.
In all, 11 tornadoes were reported across the state, 7 of those occurring right here in northern Illinois. The largest tornado, an EF4, moved from the Ashton-Franklin Grove area north of Rochelle and into the small town of Fairdale before eventually ending south of Belvedere, destroying many homes and farmsteads along its path, killing 2 and leaving many more injured.
It was at the highest end of an EF4. It had maximum sustained winds of around 200 miles per hour. This was a violent tornado, as we call it, and the strongest in northern Illinois in 25 years. It was on the ground for a little over 30 miles in a little over 40 minutes. So that's a really long-lived tornado. And it's usually those that are on the ground the most sustained that produce the higher end damage. The longer they're on the ground, usually the stronger they are.
It was also the strongest tornado on record for both Ogle and DeKalb counties. Matt Friedline with the Chicago National Weather Service says it's important for people to be prepared for these major events that can happen in northern Illinois.
We live in a very volatile part of the country in terms of weather, and so we have major high-end events here every few years, whether it be the Rochelle Fairdale tornado, the groundhog blizzard of 2011, or the cold of 2019. We can have these major events that we want people prepared for.
In the days leading up to April 9th, there were certain weather patterns and past events that meteorologists noted, indicating severe weather was possible.
Before April 9th, we saw that pattern and recognizing it as one of the ones we look for significant tornado potential in northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin. We even referenced the Utica tornado event of 2004, which much of north central Illinois remembers as this showing similar ingredients, similar time of year, April, to that event.
All the needed weather ingredients came together just at the right time for significant severe weather to occur.
It was anomalously warm and very humid for that early in the spring, for early April. We had a major weather system coming in. And then the big key ingredient, which really separates spring events from events in the summer, is wind shear. We had a lot of wind in the atmosphere, and that allowed for thunderstorms to persist longer that day.
Multiple rotating storms developed that afternoon and evening, prompting several tornado warnings. Shortly after 6:30, the first report came in of a tornado just northeast of Franklin Grove, with damage occurring near Ashton.
This is going to be the thunderstorm that is north of Ashton or just to the west of Ashton. There has been a confirmed tornado with this.
It was that storm that would strengthen, producing the EF4 tornado that moved north of Rochelle and eventually into the town of Fairdale. The prime months for tornadoes in northern Illinois are April, May, and June, but we know that severe weather and tornadoes can occur during any time of the year. That's why it's important to be prepared and have a preparedness plan at work, home, school, and even on the road, and then practice that plan just like you would a fire drill.
The Rochelle Fairdale tornado reminds us that violent tornadoes can strike northern Illinois, and that it's important to have a plan and practice it. It's everyone's own personal responsibility to heed when a warning is issued. We can hear it on TV from the National Weather Service, but it's your own personal responsibility to act on it. And that includes acting on the forecast of potential severe weather as well.
Storms like the one that occurred on April 9th, 2015, don't happen too often in northern Illinois, but they do occur. And that's why we need to make sure that we are prepared for not only the significant severe weather events, but for any severe weather.
The weather's not convenient, but thankfully we're only under a severe weather threat, usually a dozen or less days a year. Some springs and summers it's even less than that. But the real heightened days, those usually come every few years, such as April 9th, 2015. And you really have to consider adapting and modifying your plans so you are in a place to get to shelter within seconds to minutes when a warning is issued.
When we return, front row seat to destruction, a storm chaser shares his view through a lens. Tom Purdy chases storms. On April 9th, 2015, he caught dramatic images of the Rochelle Fairdale tornado. Meteorologist Joey Marino sat down with Tom as he relived his experience 5 years later.
The thought never really even crossed my mind. I mean, even that day, we were expecting, hoping to see a tornado, but a violent wedge tornado here at home, within probably 45 minutes of my own house, absolutely not.
Tom Purdy has been chasing storms for the last 10 years. Never did he expect to see something to the extent
That is a large wedge, isn't it?
of the EF4 Fairdale tornado.
We had an idea of what was going to happen probably late morning that day. There was a chance you're going to see something that you haven't seen around here before.
There's a lot that goes into planning out a storm chase, such as keeping up with model data, picking a target area with great road connections, and timing out the thunderstorm activity. Sometimes the atmospheric ingredients don't match up the morning of a storm chase.
A lot of the earlier models had that warm front making its way up into southern Wisconsin, northern Rat County, southern Dane County. So we thought maybe the warm front will lay, and we could chase right in our backyard. But it became apparent later that day that the warm front was going to reinforce a little bit further south, and set up right along, I-88 down here. So that's where Rochelle made the most sense, right along the warm front.
At first, Tom was thinking about chasing a tornadic supercell that was dropping tornadoes out near Davenport, Iowa. But he didn't want to get stuck chasing around the Mississippi River, so he and two others turned around, driving to the original target area.
So we start heading east on Route 64 there, headed towards Rochelle, that area. And we ended up getting hit with some baseball-sized hail. We were just infatuated with this hail because baseball-sized hail around here is not common either. We're sitting there playing with the hail and taking pictures of the hail, and before we knew it, the RFD of the storm had pushed all the rain and hail out, and lo and behold, there's this wedge moving across the field right in front of us.
Tom and I drove out to the Kings and White Rock areas along State Road 64, the scene of the chase, first pinpointing the exact spot where he encountered this devastating and massive tornado. He remembers the road and the tree he captured in his first pictures of this dangerous force of nature.
I'm taking pictures out of the windshield of the car, and I was just snapping pictures, holding the shutter down. Well, little did I know that I'd get, this great picture, with this tree on the side of the road, and this wedge tornado almost right down, the highway.
Shortly after seeing the tornado, Tom continued down State Road 64 until he was met up by Illinois State Police. Officers blocked off the area near Grubstakers, one of the hardest hit areas, so he had to take a detour. Emergency crews ultimately blocked him from reaching the EF4 damage as he listened in to the urgent reports coming in on his scanner in his vehicle.
That was the big thing coming on the radio, was this had collapsed, and there was 12 people trapped, and they had to do, a heavy rescue on this, and that was most of the radio traffic that day, because we had the scanner on in the car. So there wasn't much of any other damage reported other than this. Well, and then they come out and said, the neighborhood has been completely destroyed too. Well, which happens to be this neighborhood here, just to the west.
These are the areas the National Weather Service in Chicago says experienced the worst of this destructive tornado. Estimated peak winds of 200 miles per hour. And as the sun was setting, bringing an end to Tom's storm chase, there's one memory he'll never forget.
These two kids have pulled up, just hooting and hollering, teenagers, at the tornado, and they turn and the side road there, probably about a mile down. The kid actually turned to his buddy and said, "Oh my God, that's such and such's house," and you look and there's no house there. Yeah. Whose house? And then it starts to dawn on you, this house was fully impacted by this tornado and completely wiped off its foundation. So we gathered our stuff and we turned around. We were going to go over there, and by the time we got there, the sheriff actually was pulling up. We were lucky to find out that it was a couple with 2 kids, and they were actually at dinner at the time. They weren't home. They were at dinner in Rockford.
Once Tom made it back home to Janesville, the storm chase of his life quickly turned to tragedy as he learned 2 people lost their lives.
The emotion for me didn't really come into play till the next day. 12 hours ago, I'm excited, yelling in the car, there's this wedge tornado, and here we are 12 hours later, and they're announcing somebody's dead. So it a little bit of shock and awe and kind of brings you back down to earth. You don't realize what they can do until you see it up close and personal. You could see it on the TV all you want, and you think, well, that's bad. But once you see this, in life, and you can smell, and after a tornado goes through an area, you can smell earth. It's like you just dug up your garden, and you kind of just become more cognizant of your surroundings and what's going on with it.
When we return, what could have happened? An NIU professor looks at the worst case scenario and why the state line may have dodged tragedy on a much larger scale. Lucky. That's the word chosen by an NIU professor to describe the aftermath of the deadly Rochelle Fairdale tornado. As meteorologist Kevin Doom learned, though devastating for those that lived through it, it could have been much worse.
In terms of its ferocity, it was up there in terms of one of the most ferocious tornadoes I've ever seen, and you never want to see that in your backyard.
Dr. Walker Ashley is a professor of meteorology at Northern Illinois University. He's an expert on the societal impacts of severe weather, including how vulnerability to weather-related disasters will change with both the changing climate and expanding urban development. Having witnessed the Rochelle tornado firsthand, he recalls the event as being particularly unsettling.
As somebody who studies the impacts of tornadoes and other windstorms on people, it's unfortunate to see it in real life. So when you see this sort of stuff in a developed landscape where it's having a direct impact on people, it's almost horrific.
Following the event, Dr. Ashley was invited to join the National Weather Service to survey the storm and ultimately determine how the tornado would be categorized on the Enhanced Vegeta scale, though not all came to agree with the storm's eventual EF4 ranking.
There's still some debate, even to this day, between storm chasers as to whether it should have been categorized as an EF5, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter to the people that were impacted. It doesn't matter what the exact wind speed was. It had huge consequences for the people that were in the path of the event.
According to Walker, the National Weather Service, given the resulting damage, determined the tornado had fallen just a hair short of an EF5 ranking, assigned to tornadoes with wind speeds in excess of 200 miles per hour.
As for whether the Rochelle Fairdale tornado was an EF5, in my gut, I think it was. But as a scientist, I know that I can't go with my gut feeling. I need to have damage indicators. I need to have the data.
Regardless of its ranking, the tornado was undoubtedly one of the strongest to ever come through northern Illinois, though, as Dr. Ashley points out, the results could have been much worse had the tornado taken a different path.
Thankfully, for most of northern Illinois, it stayed in open farmland. It could have been a lot worse if it had moved about a mile southeast. It would have moved across 2 mobile home parks in western Rochelle at roughly 5 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. You can imagine the consequences in something like that. If it had moved about 10 to 15 miles to the northwest, it would have gone through Byron Nuclear Facility. If we move it northbound, it could have rolled through Rockford Metropolitan or DeKalb and Sycamore with the NIU population. In terms of the consequences for society, it was kind of the best scenario, but unfortunately we still had 2 fatalities and roughly about 70 homes impacted.
Walker, along with a former student, found that if the same storm had moved through Byron and eventually Rockford, 10,000 people would have been impacted, not to mention the likely devastation of the Exelon generating plant, compared to the roughly 180 people that were impacted the evening of April 9th, 2015. Shifting the path of the storm southeastward through the heart of Rochelle would have affected 2,700 people, double this number if the same path had moved over to DeKalb and Sycamore, and the results would have been historic had this tornado moved over to Chicagoland.
We simulated this event 10,000 times across northern Illinois, and this was about the best path that it could take in terms of human impact. Now, for the people in the path, that's not such a good statement, right? But for the emergency management, the resources, the hospitals, and so on and so forth, the human impact was actually quite low. If you move this same event over into the western Chicago suburbs and into Chicago, it would have affected 21,000 housing units. That's 3 times the infamous Joplin tornado.
Therefore, we should use the Rochelle tornado as an example of what could have been, a reminder to always take caution to the potential for severe weather because such a storm is possible anywhere across northern Illinois.
So I hope that people in northern Illinois have an understanding that it could be the next big event. And we got very lucky, relatively speaking, that day in terms of impacts for Rockford, Rochelle, as well as the Chicago metropolitan area.
When we return, survivors reflect. One couple describes their harrowing experience as their home was destroyed. The April 9th, 2015 Rochelle Fairdale tornado left behind an estimated $19 million in damage. Dozens of people were also left homeless in the wake of the storm, including Lauren and John Hinchy. But as reporter Brittany Toulis found out, it was a sacrifice they'd be willing to make again.
The sirens just kept going off and off and off. And we kept going, where's the bad weather? Where is it?
5 years ago on April 9th, Lauren Hinchy and other Lincoln Elementary School staff greeted parents and kids at an open house. That's when Mother Nature came roaring through.
And somebody went, oh, and I remember looking out going, oh my gosh. So then I ran back down here.
This is what Lauren saw when she looked out the school's window. A towering EF4 tornado destroying everything in its path. Seeing the danger not so far away, she jumped into action.
A lot of parents and kids were hanging out like here and over there, and we finally had to be kind of the bad guy and say, no, you need to go now. So we pushed kids and parents into closets on the interior walls. So we did all of those things, that we could.
Parents and elementary students hid in bathrooms, closets, anywhere they could find cover. The tornado left the school untouched, but Lauren knew the twister was headed straight for her Lindenwood home.
I just know it's going to hit. You just have a gut feeling. And I knew if it wasn't going to hit us, it was going to hit people we knew.
She frantically tried to get in touch with her husband, John, who was home at the time.
So made that phone call, couldn't get through. Things were jammed up in terms of phone lines, but I did get through finally, and I just said, John, you need to go to the basement. There's a tornado coming. He said, Lauren, it's sunny here. What are you talking about? And I said, I am not kidding. I've just seen the biggest tornado I've ever seen.
A few moments later, John saw what his wife was talking about.
And then it got really still, and birds stopped chirping, and it's just the wind. There's no breeze at all. So I knew we were going to really probably get it. You hear different people saying that they're intrigued so much that they're mesmerized, and I kind of felt myself being mesmerized by this tornado.
John took cover in the basement, but he had no idea what was happening above him.
For about probably 3 to 5 seconds, I didn't have any hearing because of the pressure, the air pressure. So I really couldn't hear anything. They always talk about the train noise. It sounds like a train, and I didn't hear any of that.
After the storm clouds cleared, Lauren pulled into their driveway to what was left of her house. Just glad to see John standing there waiting for her.
The neighbors were there, and I just gave him a big old hug, and he goes, I'm okay, we'll be okay.
But the storm took half of their house with it. This is a book with pictures of the aftermath. Pink insulation ripped from the walls covered floors. Farm equipment scattered across the field. The tornado actually shifted the house's walls 4 inches, and it needed to be demolished.
It was pretty overwhelming, and I think you were in shock, I was in shock. It was just a pretty overwhelming moment.
But it didn't take long for help to pour in.
It happened on a Thursday, so they were there all day Friday and Saturday. Luckily we had good weather. I mean, it was a little cool, but the sun was out and it wasn't raining. And we had people there on Sunday, and then of course on Monday everybody has to go back to their world, has to go back to work. So, but again, the next weekend there were people there.
And thank goodness it popped north because it was headed right for Rochelle. It was running 38. And both John and I have talked about this a lot. If it had to take our house versus a town, we'd put our hands in the air every single time.
Lauren and John say it took them about 2 years to fully rebuild. The couple also had 2 dogs and a barn full of pigs when the tornado hit. Luckily, all of them rode out the storm without a scratch. When we come back, on the front line when Mother Nature strikes, we sit down with first responders as they reflect on that night and the days that followed. Whenever catastrophe hits, first responders answer the call for help from their communities. When the Rochelle Fairdale tornado struck, it was no different. Mimi Murphy sat down with the members of a firehouse that played a pivotal role for survivors and the rebuilding process. They shared with her their memories of chaos.
On the evening the tornado hit, Kirkland Fire Deputy Chief Carl Bruder knew the incoming storm was no ordinary spring thunderstorm.
Being a farm kid, you look at the weather, you could see that gray ugliness, and something did happen. And the call came in, and I just started throwing clothes and things in my truck because I knew I was going to be going to someplace that wasn't so good.
Kirkland Fire Chief Chad Connell was home watching weather reports on TV when the first call came in. He quickly headed toward the station.
Ironically, the sun was shining in Kirkland at the time that I got in my car, and as I went up 72 here west of town, total darkness.
Chief Connell called for mutual aid and directed crews toward Fairdale, but their engines could only get so far. The roads leading into Fairdale were covered with debris and downed trees. Establishing a command center turned out to be a challenge.
As I was trying to map out the town on a grease board and set up a plan to have them go up certain streets in town and start looking for possible victims, they said, we don't even know where the streets are. They were covered with debris.
First responders found residents wandering around outside in disbelief.
What do you do with everybody? It started raining. We called the DeKalb and we got all these buses to come over, and we put the people in buses, at least had some type of shelter till they could figure out what they were going to do, plus what we were going to do with them.
Just when we were thinking we're getting organized and we're drawing the town for command so that they understand where all the streets are, and the heavens open up and washes our maps away, and we restart, and so yeah, it had its challenges. Mother Nature wasn't very friendly that night.
For rescuers familiar with Fairdale residents, the heartbreak of the situation was something they had to put aside and let their training kick in.
So you keep moving, you keep busy. That helps. But you still in the back of your mind, it's your friends. Tough.
You know that help is coming, but minutes seem like hours.
And then reinforcements began to arrive. Response teams from Rockford, Cherry Valley, Genoa, DeKalb, and Sycamore showed up to help.
Then the cavalry came, and things started to happen. That was a good feeling.
By morning, word of Fairdale's devastation was national news. Residents responded in a big way. Kirkland's fire station was bombarded by volunteers and the media.
Stripes and bright stars.
The fire station became the central rallying point for donations. The entire station was taken over by volunteers and filled with donations.
It was the weeks after that really, to me, was the story of how community came together and everybody helped each other out, so it was very impressive.
The Long-Term Recovery Committee kept the donation drive going for a year.
I've never been prouder to be a small part of the fire service than I was then.
In all, 11 people were taken by ambulance to local hospitals. Unfortunately, the tornado did claim the lives of 2 residents. If there's a lesson to be learned here 5 years later, it's the power of community. They are strong and stuck together to overcome this tragedy. It's a message that's more important now than ever. Thank you for joining us. Good night.
Well, when I came up out of that debris, I didn't know at that time. A few minutes later I knew. My wife was under it too. It's been 5 years. I got happiness here on this little 5 acres. Got a new house. She would have liked it. She had all kinds of flowers and bushes. But if I get back up five years in one day, I'd be glad to do it. give it all back. Then I would just be a Fairdalian with a mortgage payment and a typewriter business. That would be it. Mowing grass and petting my dog. And married.